The fair value gap is one of the most well-known concepts, used also by other strategies. Well, fair value gap is actually a funny concept because it's composed by two parts, right? On one hand, we have the fair value, and on the other hand, we have the gap. And so let's start thinking about the gap. Gap means that something is actually missing, right? So something is missing, there is something that's not there anymore. And what's not there anymore? Well, that's the fair value. And a fair value would actually mean that there is a balanced value, a balanced price. And so if we think about fair value gap, what we are implying when we think about the fair value gap is we're implying a place in the market where the fair or balanced price is actually missing. And so consequently, when is the market fair or balanced, right? You ask that question to yourself, like very naturally. Okay, there is something missing. What's missing? The fair or balanced price. Okay, but then when is the market fair or balanced? Well, when in every price point I can both buy and sell. That's going to be a balanced price, a balanced and fair place in the marketplace. And so this is the definition, guys, that I give to myself when I think about fair value gaps. But I'm sure that you also want to know ICT's official definition. And so let me take a new slide because it's a little bit long. So ICT's official definition is fair value gap is a range of price delivery where one side of the market liquidity is offered and typically confirmed with a liquidity void on the lower time frame charts in the same range of price. Price can actually gap to create a literal vacuum of trading, thus posting an actual price gap. I want to put both of those definitions here for you to see. And so the definition that I was telling you about regards the gap, so something missing, and the balanced value or price. And the ICT definition is a little bit more long, but definitely more precise. So feel free to take the one that resonates better with you. And so let's start talking about fair value gaps. And when we talk about fair value gaps, well, the first thing that I like to do is offer an example. So here we have the Euro USD on the 1 hour time frame between the 11th and the 12th of February 2024. So where can I only buy? Do you see a place in the market when I can only buy? And do you see a place on the market, a price range on the market where I can only sell? Where the price is actually unidirectional, so it's going only in one direction? Feel free to pause the video, and when you're ready, let's keep on going. So I want to highlight for you two places. So here, the first place is highlighted with a big blue arrow, and then we have another place in the market with an arrow that goes down. And so in these two areas, I can only buy in the first area, and in the second area, I can only sell. And so we will look at a three candle pattern when we're talking about fair value gaps. And so in these three candle patterns, the candle before and the candle after will leave an area of inefficiency of the candle in the middle. So there are three candles. The candle before and the candle after are going to leave an area of inefficiency. And so if I take out everything else and I just show you these three candle patterns, here you can see it a little bit more clearly. The first three candle pattern that you see here is actually a bullish movement. So the candle is going higher. And the second candle pattern is actually a bearish movement. And so the candle, the one in the middle, is going lower. When we look at fair value gaps, we will look at the wicks of the candles before and the candle after. And so what's important for us to see is the wicks of the first candle and the wicks of the third candle. In a bullish fair value gap, there is no selling in that movement of the price on that specific time frame. In a bearish fair value gap, there is no buying in that movement of the price. And you guys know me already, you know that there is one concept that's very important that we need to really tie in with fair value gaps, and that is the concept of time. Fair value gaps are specific of the time frame in which they occur. This is very important. Fair value gaps are specific of the time frame in which they occur. Fair value gaps extend in time, creating a space of price inefficiency, usually until they are fulfilled completely or touched on. Let's talk a little bit about fair value gap classification. So you know that I like to classify, I like things easy, I like things simple, and so let's try to classify them. We have here a bullish movement of the candles that we have seen before. And so here we have an imbalance in the price space and an inefficiency in the delivery. Specifically, the imbalance regards the buy side liquidity, the buy side imbalance, and the inefficiency regards the sell side inefficiency. So it's inefficient on the sell side because there is no selling. And so when we have a bullish movement and a bullish fair value gap, we actually have what's called a busy buy side imbalance, sell side inefficiency. I like this classification. Let's keep on going. We have also seen before a bearish movement. So a fair value gap that was bearish, going lower. Again, here we are going to have an imbalance in the price space and an inefficiency in the delivery. So when we think about the imbalance, that imbalance is going to be on the sell side. And when we think about the inefficiency is actually going to be on the buy side. For this reason, when we look at a bearish movement and a bearish movement with a fair value gap, we're going to have a CB, sell side imbalance, buy side inefficiency. Now, let's go back to the example that we have seen before. The first fair value gap that we see here is actually a busy buy side imbalance, sell side inefficiency. The second one that we see here is actually a CB, and so a sell side imbalance and a buy side inefficiency. Fair value gaps are a very important concept for ICT, and we need to be able to spot fair value gaps with our naked eyes. This is very important, guys. The indicators out there are not precise and move or change with the time frames and subsequent candles, which means that the indicators are not trustworthy. It is easy to use an indicator if you know how to do it on your own. But what I'm trying to convey to you here is that if you only use an indicator and you do not look at anything else, and you think that an indicator is going to be enough for you to spot fair value gaps, that's not true. You're going to get in trouble several times when you're trading. So remember, learn to do it yourself. Fair value gaps, right? Well, what we know about fair value gaps is that the price is attracted to the places in the market that are inefficient, such as, for example, a fair value gap price range. So the price wants to revisit them and fill them in, which tells us where the price will likely go later on. And so fair value gaps are actually something that is telling us where the price will likely go later on. There are fair value gaps that the price touches and they are so hot that the price runs away from them without even feeling them, okay? These type of fair value gaps are going to be called getaway fair value gaps. And the getaway fair value gap, just to give you an example directly from the ICT Mentorship 2023, is something like this. So right now we are on the E-mini futures Nasdaq 100 for the 1 minute time frame. And we can see here with the arrow a blue fair value gap. That fair value gap, which is a busy, is a getaway fair value gap. Please guys, I would like you to notice something. When there is a busy, after it, there is a bullish movement of the price. And so the price touches back into the fair value gap and keeps going higher. So busy means bullish price movement when the fair value gap is respected. There are fair value gaps that can be used to measure the price movements. They are going to be called measuring fair value gaps. So a measuring fair value gap is a fair value gap that gets formed during a bigger price movement, but on a lower time frame, such as, for example, the 1 minute time frame. The measuring fair value gap will not get filled, but it gives us an indication, a measure of the total price movement, and so a confirmation of where our target exit should be. We are going to measure from the getaway fair value gap to the measuring gap and project that price movement to find our target. So let me show it to you with an example. As we have seen before, the first fair value gap that we have here on the bottom in blue is a getaway fair value gap. Then we get a fair value gap that gets filled and the price keeps going higher. And then we get another third blue fair value gap, which is our measuring fair value gap, which is not even going to get touched or filled. But as we said before, the measuring fair value gap is useful for us to understand what is going to be our target in the price movement. And so we're going to be measuring from the getaway fair value gap until the measuring fair value gap. And we are going to take that measure, that price movement, as half of the total price move. And so we are simply going to multiply it, and this is going to be our target. Another type of fair value gap, and it's a special type of fair value gap, is also a liquidity void. A liquidity void is a total gap of buying or selling. And I want to show you a quick picture from the ICT Mentorship 2023, in which ICT was showing us a liquidity void. Now, guys, we have seen fair value gaps. We have talked about them a little bit, and it's okay if you don't have everything 1000% clear right now. But what I would like us to do is to change perspective for a moment and to think about it from the price perspective. And so, if we think about it from the price perspective, how can the price interact with a fair value gap? Remember, how the price interacts with the fair value gap is a signal to us of what the price wants to do after. And so, going back to the question, how can the price interact with the fair value gap? Well, for example, it can fill it completely, but still respecting its boundaries. In that case, the price wants to follow the fair value gap direction. And so if it's busy, then the price movement is going to be bullish. If it's a CB, the price movement is going to be bearish. So let me give you an example. In this case that we have seen before from the Mentorship 2023, the price was going already higher. This is the second fair value gap that we have seen, in which we can see that the price forms the fair value gap and then it fulfills it. And it fulfills it also with the body of the candles, respecting it. Remember, even if the price slightly goes out of the fair value gap just with the wicks, that is totally fine. The most important thing is that the bodies are respecting the fair value gap. And so this movement continues. And if we look at it, we can see that the price keeps going higher. The price can also interact with a fair value gap, filling it with the wicks only. In that case, we have a getaway fair value gap, very likely, and that's probably going to be the start of a bigger price movement, always in that direction. So if it's a busy, bullish movement, if it's a CB, bearish movement. We have seen that in the Mentorship 2023 example that I was presenting you before. It's the first type of fair value gap that we see, and it's the hot fair value gap from which the price runs away from. The price can also interact with a fair value gap by filling it with the body and the wicks. In this case, it means that the fair value gap is juicy, as long as it is respected by the bodies of the candle on the same time frame. And this is something that I really want to highlight, on the same time frame. Even if the wicks are not respecting it, it is valid. And so the wicks and the bodies of the candle, when you are reading them and deciding which type of fair value gap this is, need to be on the same time frame of the fair value gap. So when the fair value gap has formed. And to give you an example, I want to show you this here. This is a fair value gap on the 1 hour time frame. We have several candles touching upon it, and only the wicks, actually only one wick has actually formed and went a little bit lower than that fair value gap. But considering that this is a fair value gap on the 1 hour time frame and the wicks and the bodies are also in the 1 hour time frame, that still means that our fair value gap was respected. Now, the price can also interact with a fair value gap by running it over without respecting it. In that case, the price does not want to follow the fair value gap direction. And I just want to give you here a quick example. We have here a fair value gap, a bearish fair value gap, so a CB that's being formed. We can see here that the candle on the same time frame in which the fair value gap was formed did not respect that fair value gap at all, and it kept going in the opposite direction. Now, guys, we talked about it, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. Time is always the most important thing. Before jumping to conclusions, look at the fair value gap on the same time frame on which it has formed and is forming the candles. This is also the reason why you want to know how to draw them, so that you can assign different colors, for example, to different time frames and different fair value gaps on different time frames. And now, guys, I want to tell you a secret. And this is really a well-kept secret in the ICT community, and it's not very well clear for me why. Many traders think that they have understood what is a fair value gap and that everything they need to know is there and that they can use an indicator and that's about it. A fair value gap is a fair value gap, you have an indicator and that's about it. Well, that's not true. What you need to learn about fair value gaps is not just how to draw a fair value gap or which type of fair value gap that is, but how the price is going to interact with that fair value gap. And so we need to understand what the price is going to do while it is still inside that fair value gap. Okay, because it's super easy for me to analyze you the price movements right now when the price movements is already done. But can I understand what the price is going to do while it's still inside that fair value gap and still interacting with it? And so my question for you guys, how do we know what the price is going to do while it is still inside the fair value gap? Very often happens that even just during the silver bullet times, there are many fair value gaps being formed. Some of them are in one direction, some of them are busy, others are CB, and so on and so forth, and there is more than one being formed. Maybe there is one that got formed a little bit before our silver bullet time. How do we know which one to enter? Well, there are specific things that we can look for, such as, for example, higher time frames. What are higher time frames telling us? What is our bias for that day, for that specific price movement? If we look at the same time frame of the fair value gaps, very often we're going to see specific indications. And also, the higher the time frame of the fair value gap, usually the stronger that fair value gap is as a price attractor. We can observe the reaction of the price when it touches the fair value gap and its eventual rejection from that area. Does the price stay there and it's enjoying its time inside the fair value gap? Or is it a little bit uncomfortable, trying to get out there, trying to find the strength to actually go and touch that fair value gap? We can observe the speed with which the candles form, and we can observe the size of the wicks and of the body that are being formed. Guys, for all of these insights that I'm giving you here right now, there is no shortcut, okay? We need to stay in front of the charts, being humble, and observe the price movement to be sure that this is a fair value gap that we want to enter. We're going to see other confirmations that regard all of the things that we have said, but in general, there is no shortcut. We need to stay in front of the charts, observe, and have our own idea. It takes time. It takes time in front of the charts, looking at price movement to become a great trader. This concludes our fair value gap lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to see you in the next video. Keep going, guys. This is the way.